year now.
I love it. All right, we're here with Ben Harris, our buddy, and this is the second time he has soccer jerseyed me because, fun fact, we were going to go live back when we were doing this as a radio show, and he said, "What do I wear?" I was like, "Well, business casual, whatever." And he's like, "Well, I'll be coming from work, great." And he's got on, this shirt vest kind of combo thing. And as soon as I hit record, he rips it off and he's got his Aston Villa jersey on underneath it. And he did the whole way doing his Aston Villa jersey. So this is twice you've done this to me, young man. You've done the soccer jersey, but at least it's the right call. Are you going to be able to walk around in England in that thing? Is it going to be all right?
Yeah.
What's going on with this?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, most people, my mum said it looks like Dennis the Menace, so I don't think, a lot of people wouldn't even probably know where it's from. So,
oh my goodness. Yeah. Do you have Dennis the Menace in England?
Yeah, I thought it was from the UK. Is it not?
I don't know. Because I've always thought of it as, of course, the cartoon strip, and then the Walter Matthau version. I think is the best.
I think there's an English version of it. So I watched the English version growing up, and it wasn't.
Was it like The Office, where it was good in England, and then it was here, but it's different?
Yeah, I don't know which version came first. Obviously, I know The Office came first, but Dennis the Menace, I'm not sure.
Anyway, it is the 4th of July. Unfortunately, I don't get to be up yonder, but I did wear my up yonder gear. I've got it on. So I miss our folks up yonder, but I was like, well, adapt and overcome. If I'm stuck at the house, let's at least talk about it. Buddy, how are you? How's it been? How's jolly old England? Because y'all had the heat wave a couple weeks ago, and now we're having it now. So
yeah, it's good. It's a bit more pleasant now. It was awful a few weeks ago. It was absolutely unbearable. Just humidity, everything about it. I was in the office one of the days. Actually, that was fine because my office was air conditioned, but most places here aren't air conditioned.
Oh well, let's just start there because that's been the big running thing is AC, no AC, and we'll just start right there because I was in Europe in 2003 when they had the really bad heat wave and 30,000 people died. I'll say that number again: 30,000 people died. Almost half of those were in France. We're talking about American greatness. Look, the fastest economic growing area in the entire world is the American Southeast and Texas. Those places don't grow without air conditioning. It's an economic thing. It's a humanitarian thing. You just said it. Your office has air conditioning, but the part that the American thing is the UK has a massive energy crisis right now. And energy is probably second only to the housing crisis. And those two things probably go together really well. Energy is a big deal. So it's not as easy as just slapping air conditioning in old buildings. Y'all got energy problems where you probably can't handle an AC grid, number one. Number two is nobody be able to afford it.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, in some ways, I think the energy crisis is worse than the housing crisis because the housing crisis, at least in the last
it's chicken and egg, right? It's like...
Yeah, the housing crisis has... prices have sort of stagnated a little bit because our economy stagnated. But the energy crisis, the energy prices since the Russian invasion of Ukraine have gone up, immensely. And the problem really is that we were too reliant on Russian gas and European gas in general. And the basic problem is that our planning system, and I said this before, our planning system is so backwards. So our planning system gives effectively a veto for, NIMBYs, a small number of NIMBYs, to basically veto any sort of national infrastructure projects, housing projects, anything. So as a result, it costs a lot more money to get energy infrastructure in the ground. A good example is pylons. So overhead pylons to bring electricity, they cost a certain amount. If they go underground, they cost about 4 times more. But because of NIMBYs, we have to put them underground a lot. And that's the problem. And it just costs too much to build the energy infrastructure here. And as a result, we're very reliant on gas. We're very reliant on external shocks to the energy market affect us more. And yeah, it's a big problem. And it's a problem in Europe in general, but it's a big problem here especially.
Let's walk through this because this is one thing. I just did another podcast. I was talking about the UK stuff because you had just had the political turnover and Andy Barnum and all that's going on. The system of government, it's not just a parliamentary system that's different, although that's vastly different. And it's not just the quasi-rural where you still have the trappings of the rural stuff, but parliament's pretty much what they say go with very few exceptions. You just mentioned it without using the term. So walk people through the term. Council level government in the UK is kind of where everything's broken down right now. And people, especially an American audience, maybe the Canadian internet, because even the Canadian parliamentary system is very different than the UK's in a lot of ways. That council system and the way it feeds into parliament, you just saw that with the Burnham election. That's where the breakdown really, really is in the UK right now. And that's all the local stuff that's doing things like zoning and building and all that. It's also where you start seeing the first effects of a lot of the state agency stuff where you're going to spend your money. That's really the breakdown. But explain how that works in the UK, because that's a vast difference in how the American system works.
Yeah, so as I understand it, I think in the American system, if your building is up to code, then you get approval. Whereas here, essentially, there's always like a consultation period, and like if for example, say McDonald's wants to open a good example actually is we've got a supermarket. They want to open near another supermarket here, and they have to go. Even the land there's nothing on the land. It's not even in a residential area. It's right on the edge of town. It's a good area for it, but because there's a supermarket next to it, they are able to frustrate the process and prevent the other supermarket, their competition, from opening. And it's the same in any sort of building you do. You have to get planning permission for almost anything. And if, for example, you want to put something in your garden, you have to get planning permission for it, and your neighbours can object to it. And it can be the most silly, trivial things, and they can object to it. And so, as I said, effectively, everyone has a veto on building, and it frustrates growth. It's a huge problem here. But the worst thing about it is that there doesn't seem to be any real desire for change among people. You mentioned Andy Burnham. Now, Andy Burnham was mayor of Manchester, and they actually did build quite a lot under his tenure. They were one of the fastest growing parts of the UK, and that's one of the reasons why he's relatively popular at the moment. But he did a Reddit Q&A yesterday, and he was asked about a lot of the issues with the UK. And one of the issues that came up was HS2, which is high-speed rail 2. And that's been a really big project. That's been a bit, over budget, over time. It's been a disaster. And he was asked about it. And he said that, one of the problems was that local communities weren't given enough of a say. When actually that's exactly the problem. Because the reason why HS2 has taken so long is because instead of just building it, they had to build a lot of it underground because the local NIMBYs objected to various parts of it being built. So he's completely missed the point. And I have absolutely no faith that he's going to ever, get close to reforming this system. He might just make it worse because people think that, consulting with communities, and often by communities, what they mean is residents groups who are well motivated to block anything, usually older people with more time in their hands who don't have a stake in the future, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and one thing I've talked about, and I want to get to your piece here in a minute about American exceptionalism and your love affair with America, which you're literally wearing on your sleeve today. So thank you for making that metaphor nice and easy, buddy. Even though your Orioles beat my Reds last night, but we won't talk about that.
Oh yeah, we did, yeah.
Okay, that's enough of that. Back to the topic. I think there's a real correlation between the young people problem the UK is having, because you is one, and a lot of our other friends were talking about. I just wrote about this a week or so ago, again, with the Burnham chances and all that. It's like, there's about to be a generational cliff for the UK because what you just talked about. The older people are running over the councils are just running roughshod over even the national government in a lot of ways. The housing crisis is bad. The job crisis is bad. The energy crisis is bad. And you've got the cream of the crop of the current millennial and Gen Z working ages, that 25 to 40 demographic that should be the core of your country for the next 30 years. They can't get jobs and they can't get housing.
Yeah.
And because of the Commonwealth system, they got options. They can go to the continent. They can go to the Commonwealth countries. They can come to America or whatever. You talk about it because you're living in an experience. And I know I've talked to you when you were working in Parliament about the ridiculous commute you had to deal with.
Well, I'm back in Parliament now. So it's
and you're back now in a different role. But so again, he knows what he's talking about, guys. He tromps around Westminster. Talk about that from your viewpoint, because I think that's something that Americans take for granted, even with the problems we're having with higher ed. And no, we have a lot of opportunities still. There's some real doom and gloom with the, let's call it under 40 demographic right now in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. So, housing is a big part of it. I know there's a housing problem in the US too, but I don't think it's as bad. We have people my age. I still live with my parents at 32. I'm very close to buying a house off them. But it's taken a lot of saving. A lot of people don't have that. A lot of people are in their 30s. They're sharing really expensive flats in London, into their 30s and 40s. They can't get on the housing ladder, so they can't have kids. The job situation it's all interconnected with the fact that we can't build anything. The fact that we're not a country that's set up to grow. We're a country that's set up to sort of preserve what we have rather than actually grow the pie, and that's the problem. And I think a lot of it is also, blame the governments and blame the politicians, but actually a lot of it is down to people themselves. People in this country generally, they've got a rationing mindset. They don't believe that you can grow the pie. Instead of building more reservoirs, building more energy infrastructure to bring more energy and bring more resources, their sort of approach is, well, how can we ration it better? How can we ration it best? And the current government, they've not helped at all with regards to growth. I mean, Keir Starmer promised to, be really serious about growth and get the country growing again. And he had a huge majority and a huge mandate to do that. And he basically did nothing. In fact, if anything, he made it worse. He put up taxes on, I think, the national insurance. It made it harder for employees to hire people. And as a result, since the government came in, unemployment's got even worse, and it's just a doomed spiral. And I don't really know how we get out of it, because Burnham doesn't seem to have any answers. And to be honest, I'm not really sure Farage and Reform do either, because that's the thing. People say, Nigel Farage and Reform, they're Thatcherites, they're neoliberal, right-wing conservatives, etc. But they often have the same pressures when it comes to older people. In fact, if anything, they're more beholden to the NIMBYs. So I don't expect too much change to them either.
This is I just wrote about this the other day, is that we have the 6th going out the door. We know who the 7th is, and I was joking, we already know who the 8th's going to be, and he's going to fail too. That was kind of my joke on it. To be fair, and I think this is a lesson America needs to learn from our British cousins for a little while. A lot of this is, I think Parliament is trying to solve things politically that are structural problems, and you cannot politically and ideologically solve structural problems with politically popular ideology, because the stuff to fix the structure isn't popular. Yeah. And that's the doom loop that the UK stuck in. And it's not that America's immune to it. It's just we have 330 million people in climbing. You've got 44-ish, something along those lines.
About 70 million, I think people said.
Is it that much now? Is it higher than that? So we have a lot more people. We have a much bigger economy. We're going to get away with it for longer. But we've got the same problem. We've got a debt problem. We've got a health crisis. We've got Social Security insolvency. We got all that. Y'all have pension problems and NHS problems and a demographic problem. It's just you're a smaller country with a smaller economy, so you can't get away with it anymore. And you're going to have to make those hard calls. It's not that it ain't coming here. It's just you're going first, and I think we should learn the lessons of it. It's like, look, math is math. You can either do it the hard way or the really hard way. And it looks like our UK friends are deciding to do it the really hard way because they don't want to tackle the structural problems. So you have this dichotomy of, we have a demographic crisis, but we're going to just beat our head into the wall on immigration. We have a budget crisis, but NHS is untouchable no matter how much it's not working. We want to be a world power, but we can't fund our Ministry of Defense. Like, this is just structural stuff that a buzzword isn't going to fix.
I think the thing that probably highlights it best is obviously Starmer and Labour are very unpopular. But there was recently a word cloud they did of why do you hate, what have the government done wrong? And by far more than anything else, it was the winter fuel allowance. So when Starmer first came in, a few months into office, he had the idea of means testing this winter fuel allowance, which was essentially a handout given to pensioners of all ages, of all incomes. And it's wrong. I mean, if you're a wealthy pensioner, you should not be getting free money from the government just willy-nilly. It's wrong. And the government tried to, in fairness to them, I thought it was a good thing. They probably could have implemented it better, but they did try and reform it. And it was so unpopular, they had to U-turn. And that was it for them. They tried this one little thing to bring some balance back. And they were crucified for it. And then Burnham's not going to try. He's not going to try and touch that. He's already said the triple lock is essentially untouchable.
Explain what that is. People don't know. It's not directly analogous to our Social Security system, but it's kind of the same base core issue. Just explain triple lock to them real quick. So
triple lock, I think, it's the pensions will not rise. Pensions will rise every year, the state pension, by the rate of inflation. Oh, what's the other one? There's something else and something else.
Cost of living, I forget what the other one is.
Whichever is higher. Yeah, it's like let me look up. It's so it's there we go. Let's have a look. Yeah, average earnings, the rate of inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is highest. Which right now is probably inflation, and it just rises every year. Whichever is highest, it rises on that, and it doesn't really bear any relation to the real economy. So average wages can stagnate, but the pension triple lock still rises every year because we've got stagflation, and it still rises, and it's essentially a wealth transfer from people who are younger and working to people who are older. And obviously there are people who are older who do need support, and I get that. But the problem is a lot of support for the elderly is not means tested, and people who are wealthy get it anyway, and that's not fair. But you try and tackle that, and you can't, because the elderly demographic tend to vote the most, and no one's willing to tackle it, and it's it's a doom loop.
Yeah, and elderly people with money are the number one political donors. That's a universal thing, whether you're in England or America or Swahili land or anywhere else. Elderly people have money. Elderly people have time on their hands. They're the most politically active. They love to give money to politics. So that's the problem we got now, where the boomer thing's overdone in America. Look, my parents are boomers because I'm kind of generationally offset a little bit. My parents are boomers, but like the boomers have all the wealth in America right now. With people are screaming about billionaires. All the boomers put together have more money than the billionaires do. But which one sounds better on Twitter? We don't want to talk about it because then it's like, don't you attack those old retirees? Like, yeah, well, the old retirees got all the money. Yeah, a lot of them do. But it's a universal problem of, and the older I get, the less ideologically I get. I was like, look, this is just a math thing. There's a trade-off. If you're going to have government that gives out pensions, you either have means tests and say these people get and these people don't, which is a hard conversation to have, or you have a government that can't do math going forward because they're going to give out more than they can bring in, and it's never going to balance. And both of our countries have decided to do just give out the money and don't deal with the politically tough part. It's just we're going to get away with it longer because we got a better economy.
Yeah, also you're a younger country as well. I think and you have that you have more of a draw in terms of attracting businesses and immigrants and stuff. But I mean, it's the same in France. I mean, France, whenever the government tries to, the French pension system is so lenient. I think the retirement age is ridiculously low. Whenever they try and raise it a little bit, in response to rising, the average life expectancy, they riot over it, literally. So it's how do you even tackle this? And it feels like we're going to get to a stage where, in 20 years' time, there's going to be a shrinking number of young working people who are going to be working to basically support this huge demographic of older people, many of whom are asset rich. And it's how do you fix that without having? And that's the problem with what I think. This is what annoys me with Starmer has done so much, is the fact that he came in with this huge majority. He had leeway to fix it, or at least to fix it a little bit, and he messed up, and he didn't even really try. And when he did it in a really bad way. And it's just, well, where do you even go from that? And it's hard not to be very pessimistic.
It's closer than you think. I looked it up. It's 41.5 to 39.3. It kind of surprised me a little bit, the median age.
Yeah.
That sort of surprised me because you think we're a much younger country, but not really. It's interesting. Let me spin it back this way a little bit. When you look at America's system of governments right now, look, we've taken some lumps on the national stage because of the mess between, whatever you think of President Trump, he has his own style. Of course, we had President Biden and then his cognitive decline, which was a little embarrassing. Now we have President Trump completely off the leash doing whatever he wants, which, I find it embarrassing, and a lot of the world does, but some people like it apparently. You're looking at it from afar. How do you balance it? Because I know there's those jokes like, well, for years and years and years in England, the parliamentary system was a lot more stable when it came to your national leaders. Well, now you're getting ready. When's the convention? The third week of July, that Andy Burnham will officially become PM, something like that. So, you're getting ready to have your 7th PM in 10 years. I don't think the joke holds up anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, in the US, of course, you have your term limits. The president is, the president and parliament and congressional elections are set, every 2 years for Congress, and it's every third of the Senate for every 6 years, and it's just all very set in stone. They have to work with that. Whereas here, it's basically just based on who can command a majority of parliament. And I think that the problem is because we've had so much stagnation lately. I think Brexit did distract from a lot of issues for quite a long time. That was a sort of 3 years when nothing got done because it was just all about Brexit and people trying to stop Brexit, or people trying to implement their own version of Brexit. But because we stagnate so much, people are so there's so it's such a dysfunctional system right now. I think that's why we have such a high turnover. But on the other hand, from afar, something I've always found odd with the American system is you've almost got too much democracy, especially the primary system, where you've seen recent primaries where you've got really far left Democrats who are winning, beating these incumbents in these safe seats. But of course, where you have both parties, left, Republicans and Democrats. They have extremists who win these seats and win these primaries. And it's basically, a lesser of the two evils will end up winning the general election because, basically where the Democratic Party base is, where the Republican Party base is, as I understand, not where the American people are. You look at, all these politicians, for all the hype around Mamdani, he underperformed in New York. The only reason he won was because it was New York, which is a Democratic state. But, look at Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He's a moderate.
Adams and Cuomo were about the two worst, most really, that's what you could come. Actually, that's a fair point to bring up, though. Is one of the differences because where you have party leadership, part of the thing with Starmer is because he was the one that led labor for so long and led him out of the wilderness and brought him back. There wasn't a heir apparent set up yet because it kind of took him by surprise how fast this thing went. That's just logistically what happened. They didn't have anybody next in line because they weren't prepared for him to go down that fast. It's just the thing. Whereas we also have elections in America where you don't know who's getting in there. It's not really controlled by the party as much as people probably think it is. And you have these wild cards show up. So I don't know that it's one system's better than the other. I think it's just two different problems based on here's where the party completely controlled it. And Labor had their, I don't know if it was completely historic, but at least in the modern era, Labor had the biggest, it feels weird even 2 years later saying that Labor had the biggest majority of the modern era.
Yeah.
19 months ago.
Look at Blair. I mean, Blair won his majority. It was a similar size. I think Blair won a couple more seats, but it was basically the same sort of majority.
Yeah.
When Blair won in 1997, he was popular for years. They won exactly the same landslide in 2001, 2005. Even despite Iraq, which was unpopular, they still won a fairly big majority. And it took years for New Labour to become stale. Starmer's Labour was stale within 6 months. And I mean, part of that's down to him and the way he is. I was open to him. I didn't vote Labour. I didn't vote for anyone in the last election because I was quite disenfranchised and disillusioned. But I thought Starmer could be an okay prime minister. That didn't happen. He's been far worse than I thought he'd be. But on the other hand, as well, there is also the structural problems we talked about. And yeah, he tries to do anything, and his backbenchers rebel. And what's the point of having a big majority if you can't control it? So. It's a system which is rapidly falling apart.
Well, we got the same problem because our system. I got into this debate with the Supreme Court. We had all these real heavy Supreme Court rulings this past week because it was the end of the Supreme Court term, and I took some flack from our blue sky friends, and that's okay because they're a little bit more hardcore, to the left of the spectrum, and Twitter's a little bit more of a free for all to the right, give or take. And that's fine. I get along with everybody that wants to get along and have a conversation. But we were talking about like the Supreme Court. Everybody's banging on the Supreme Court, and they do have some bad decisions. But it's like, well, wait a minute. Part of the problem with the Supreme Court right now is they're saying they're trying to make a three-legged stool work with one leg right now because the executive's all out of whack, and Congress won't do anything to reel in the executive, and everybody wants the court to do it because it's easier to take a lawsuit to the Supreme Court than try to get something through Congress. So our entire system of government's out of whack right now. And then if there's a theme of the Roberts Court, I know people are going to be like, well, it's this and it's Dodge, and they're like, no. The theme of the Roberts Courts, if you actually read the major opinions, and I actually do read them, at least the summary. I don't read all. Look, I'm not going to claim I read all the decisions because you just can't. Like the birthright citizenship was 197 pages of dissents and partial dissent. Like, nah, I'm good. But I read all the summaries of the original. The theme of the Roberts Court is Congress is supposed to fix this. Why are we dealing with this? Congress needs to fix this. Over and over and over again, they say this. And then everybody comes out and goes, we got to fix the Supreme Court. It's like, well, no, wait a minute. We have control over Congress, but that's the part we don't take control of at all. Whereas y'all have the parliamentary system. You have direct control over everything because with some very, very finite legal things that the high courts can intervene in, basically whatever Parliament says over there goes. You don't have, constitutional checks and balances. You don't have the executive. You don't have the Supreme Court overriding laws. So y'all even more on paper, you have more direct control than we do. But in some ways, you take less direct control than we do, if that even makes sense. It's very weird.
I think part of the problem is that MPs and MPs over the years have become like glorified sort of councillors. They're expected to sort of be very hyper local focused, and there's almost, it's gone too far the other way. So, for example, back in 100 years ago, Winston Churchill, who was of course an MP for a long time, he would have barely been in his seat. He was very focused on big picture. The problem now is the opposite. We don't have, a lot of MPs aren't interested in tackling national issues, tackling these long-term issues. They're more focused on the constituents because, I suppose, that's the way constituents feel it should be. We've got a politics really which is it just feels like it's breaking down. And I think the social media age, social media plays a big role here. Everyone's living in different echo chambers, and it's making everything out of whack. Hardly anyone can agree on anything anymore because we're getting our informations from different places, and people are living in different realities. It's the same in the US, and from what I've seen, it's people, on the one side you've got people who live in this reality, people live in this reality, people live in this reality, and it's like, well, how do you bring them together? They get in fundamentally different things, and you've got hostile foreign actors who then muddy the waters of that, because they do.
Yeah, and we got the same problem here. But the other thing is, boy, how much trouble you want to cause on this podcast? I could get into it. I mean, we could talk about Belgravia is basically Little Russia for like how far you want to take this, but it's true that, look, London's always going to have, I should say England, but really it's London, because there's London and there's England. Let's just call it what it is. There's always going to be this push-pull with the continent, with the UK. Always. There's no way around that.
Mm-hmm.
And what Brexit, if we step back from Brexit for a second and look at it historically for a minute, I was all for England pulling out of Brexit if they chose to do so and voted to do so. I'm an American. I've got, my feelings on freedom and voting. Like, I'm with Meckham. I think you should get what you vote for, good and hard, right? Like, that's where I'm at on it. The problem with the Brexit thing was, and the EU did it on purpose because they wanted to try to make an example of it, is like, there's no way the UK and the EU can't have a economical relationship. It has to, for everybody's good. Yeah. And the fact that you politically decided we're not going to have any relationships, like, well, no, that's not going to work. We know that. And then I think that's where the ideology and the terminology and some of the foreign influence, that's the crack that they got into. It wasn't the, I think, fair principle of the EU's got too much power over the UK. I think that was a fair argument. But then it goes all the way to the wall of, we're not going to have anything to do with the EU under any circumstances. Like, well, no, that's lunacy. That's just not taking reality. And it just went all the way here. And then the EU saw their one chance to dogpile the one dissenter, and, well, let's make an example of them because, Brussels thinks way too highly of themselves. Sorry, I know we're playing Belgium Monday, so we got to get our digs in. But Brussels thinks way too highly of themselves, and they just saw their chance to come off the top rope and really make it hurt, and they did. From afar, I'm just watching, like, man, this is just mutually destructive when you guys have to have a symbolic relationship. They need one of those too. Symbiotic relationship in some form and fashion here, because there's no way this doesn't work. And then I see the exact same ideology and funding streams in America that are screaming isolationism in America. And it's the same people with the same funding streams, with the same backgrounds in both the UK and here. That nationalistic, isolationist, we don't need the world, who cares what happens in the world? Like, well, you better, if you like your cheap goods, if you like your cheap energy, if you like a peaceful world, because I like having a peaceful world. I've been in warfare in other places because we had to be there. It's not fun. I don't want to do that. I don't want my kids doing that. If you want a peaceful world, you have to be engaged in the world all the time, not just when you feel like it. If you want world economy ripping, you got to be engaged all the time. And I think kind of the problem with the Brexit thing, and it goes into the isolationist and the nationalist problem America politics has right now, is if you don't rein it in, it just goes to that wall where you're not in reality anymore of, no, you really do have to work with other people or this ain't going to work. And now you're going to have a lot of pain involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that during the Brexit debates, there was extremists sort of within the Leave camp who wanted. And my boss Michael, he was a big Leaver, but he was also a pragmatist. He wanted a deal. He knew that a deal was important eventually, but there were some who just wanted, they wanted no cooperation whatsoever, and that was not realistic. But I think the thing people often mistake about foreign influence operations, people often say, "Oh, well, Russia and Putin, they wanted Brexit." I don't think they wanted Brexit as such. They just wanted division.
They wanted the chaos.
They wanted the chaos, yeah, and they also, I suspect, had a hand in some of the the rejoin and the second referendum stuff, because that caused a lot of problems, and that's what they want. They don't care which side wins. They just want it to drag out and distract from what they're doing, what they're doing elsewhere, and that's the point. But yeah, Brexit is one of those issues, and I think it's also been a cultural thing that people hold on to. Like a good example is a lot of these people now who are very pro EU, they go around with the EU flags everywhere. Before Brexit, they were not really that sort of keen on the EU. They latched onto it as like a cultural thing, and it's become a cultural replacement.
Identity.
Yeah,
they take an identity and you supplement policy and ideology with identity. We're seeing the same thing with. And it's everybody, oh, he's both sides again. Well, when both sides quit doing it, I'll quit both sides. But, MAGA is an identity movement. It really is. It's an identity movement. But so is our progressive friends.
Yeah, and I actually did an article. I did an article about a year ago saying people need to stop treating politics like a football team. And actually, I think people should be encouraged to get into sport, because actually, sports is a good way to draw off tribalism from the political system. I'm very tribal when it comes to Villa. I'm very tribal. I'm very obnoxious. I'm very tribal.
You're saying this in a USA jersey. I just want to point that out.
Yeah. But I'm very tribal. Like when it comes to football, not so much nationally. I'm less tribal there. When it comes to my team, the Orioles and Villa, I am very tribal. And if you're another team, I will hate you regardless. I only like my own team. But it's a way of it gets it out of your system. It's a healthy form of competition. When politics is not suited to tribalism, it shouldn't be. It doesn't make it work, and that's the problem. People are sort of having politics as a substitute for a community or a sport, and it's just not. It's not good for anyone.
You would never in a million years guess the English team I keep up with. Like if I put a gun to your parents' head, you couldn't figure it out.
What league are they in?
And it's not, no, because it ain't a Premier League team either.
Is it like Championship or League?
They have been. I'll give you one hint because you're never going to get this. They have been a Premier League team at one time. They have not been for a long time though. In fact, they were one of the original Premier League teams.
It's not Sheffield United, is it?
No.
Or Wednesday, Sheffield Wednesday.
No, Oldham.
Oh, not something like Bradford. No, Bradford were only for a couple of seasons. Wimbledon, I don't know. Wimbledon, maybe.
Oldham.
How did you get into Oldham?
So they have this is off topic, but I don't care. It's my show. So I was stationed in Frankfurt for years.
Yeah.
And this is the old Vault Stadium before they rebuilt it for the World Cup. The old, iron built like that. Man, that thing moved on you. And you go in there and they're shooting flares at each other, and it's crazy. I love it. The Waldstadt and the old Vault Stadium. But we were at a game, and it turns out Frankfurt Eintracht and Oldham have a long-standing supporter relationship. They still do to this day. So I was at the Frankfurt game, and then all of a sudden, way up in the corner, Double Bowl Stadium, there's a bunch of guys in blue shirts up there, like just acting the fool. I'm like, did they come to the wrong? And they were playing Dortmund, so it's yellow and red, right? Black and red and yellow. There's these guys in blue shirts. I'm like, did they go to the wrong game? What's going on with that? And they were Oldham supporters. That was their travel game they do every year. Frankfurt sends some guys over there, and the Oldham guys were up in that corner. I was like, all right, I got to check this out. So I worked my way around, went and talked to him. I'm like, explain this to me. I'm like 22, 23. I don't know anything about anything. It's the first major soccer game I've ever been to. And there was like 17 or 18 of them. They're like, yeah, we do this every year. Some of us come over, and then they'll come over one game, and we have a supporter agreement and whatever. And I'm like, this is very cool. It reminded me of kind of our college football culture, where you have, the rivalry games, and they'll do some tailgating together, and, there'll be some fun back and forth. But that's how I got to know who they are. So I've kind of just kept up with them over the years. So they're very bad. They're coming back now. They got promoted back up to somewhat respectable. They got a local business guy that bought them out and is putting some good money into them, and they'll be okay. But yeah, anyway. That's how I got into. That was my entry.
It's always interesting to meet Americans and foreigners who don't follow the top teams. They follow different, lower teams.
I try to follow people I actually connect with, and so I keep up with Frankfurt because I live there, and that was my first real soccer experience outside of the U.S. And we had German exchange students. We had a soccer team one year while I was in school because we had German exchange students and an Austrian exchange student. and it was 96. So it was after the 94 World Cup, and that's how we got into soccer. But anyway, yeah. And by the way, that last night was one of the best soccer games. That was one of the best sporting events.
Argentina and Cape Verde.
That is one of the best sporting events I've ever watched. My whole household was just riveted. We were living on every bit of it. When I thought that last goal they were going to tie one more time, it's like it was a freaking Disney movie, man.
Yeah, it was really good. And Cape Verde, remember, I think they're ranked 13th in Africa, something like 69th in the world. They are Cape Verde have no right to be doing this well, and they've really pushed them all the way.
They were ranked 69th out of 64 qualifying teams. That was the joke they were talking about. I love it. Let's talk about America for a minute. I put the link in the chat for folks who want to know. Ben put it on Substack. I've cross-posted it to Ordinary Times. It's up there for the American audience that sometimes things are weird, or if you don't want to do Substack. There's been a big debate, especially in the last week running up into the 250. And then Mamdani gave his speech, really lit this off last couple of days. And then Trump gave his speech, which lit it off the other way. And we have this back and forth. We were having this debate over American exceptionalism. Is it a real thing? And if it is, what does it mean? And I know I have my thoughts on it that are pretty well honed at this point. But when you hear that term sitting there in your USA jersey being a, kiss up, friends hold friends accountable. Sorry. When you hear the term American exceptionalism, though, because you not only know your history and you're not only a well-educated and well-spoken guy, you work in Parliament. Like, you understand how governments actually work and don't work. So you see it from both sides. When you see American exceptionalism, or you hear that term, what's it mean to you?
So, American exception to me it's the identity. There's a really good quote actually at the end of my article. Let me see if I can find it. It was some random person on Twitter, but it was a great quote, and I don't think it could really, you wouldn't really apply it to any other country in the world. Somebody said on Twitter, and I find the quote just now. They said, "There are Americans all over the world. They just happen to be born elsewhere and haven't made it home yet." There's something about America which just attracts people, and it's because it's a relatively new country. It's less rooted in sort of blood and soil, and it's less rooted in birth and more rooted in what you believe, your ideals. This idea that anyone can become an American. You can go to another country and you can never truly be with them. Whereas America, because it's a nation built on immigrants, I know that's a cliche, but it is. It's this idea of, there's something about it. I can't quite explain it, but there's just something about the American outlook, and it's one of the three things I highlighted in my essay, as it were, was the abundance, diversity, and freedom. And freedom was the biggest one for me. There's a certain way Americans tend to look at the world, regardless of left or right, which I think is quite unique, and it's the way you. I think it comes from your history, a lot of it, because there's a country that rebelled against colonial masters, us, over tax, and it's the way that you look at the world, and it's the way that the importance you place on freedom and principles. And I think America's not a perfect country, and there's a lot of things I think you do worse than us, and it's not going to ever be perfect, but it's not hard to see why people idolize it and want to move there every year. There is definitely something there, intangible, about America. I think this idea that it can constantly reinvent itself. It's a constantly changing, canvas of everything. It's essentially, in a way, it's almost like a representation of humanity. An imperfect one, a very imperfect one, but it's everyone comes there and contributes, and it's just. I mean, if you compare, for example, immigrants to America tend to integrate and be far more successful than immigrants to most other countries, and there's a reason for that, and that's American exceptionalism to me. It's the fact that you can come there and then just integrate, straight away, and you don't really get that anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because, like, when I first started traveling worldwide, and because I was in the military, so it was a little different, but living in Europe twice, being all around the world, being in the Middle East, being in Southwest Asia, been to the Horn of Africa. I've kind of been geographically all over the world, quite literally. It's always interesting watching the reaction when, look, we're not subtle. Like, people know immediately you're an American as soon as you
Yeah.
start talking, without exception. It doesn't matter where you. I can be in Thailand, I can be in Sicily, I can be in England. Like, as soon as you start talking, they know you're an American immediately. Everybody, whether they speak English or not, they just know it. And I always thought that's just kind of a weird thing. And then I started thinking, I was like, no, that's the thing in and of itself. Like, we're one of the few countries where you can just tell an American almost immediately.
Yeah.
And there's just something about it. And it never really hit me until the second time I lived in Germany. And maybe it was different because I was a little bit older. I had my family with me that time. I was single the first time I was over there. But traveling with my family, and you go to the tourist spots too. But we tried to, you'd go to like the Neuschwansteins or whatever. But we tried to go to like a lot of mom and pop stuff. Like we'd stay at a beer garden and stay in the room upstairs and do stuff like that. Non-touristy stuff on purpose. And the way people reacted to having a young family of Americans traveling was one of the really amazing things. Because one is they were, I had 4 kids, which is a little unusual. Big families in Europe's a little unusual. So everybody's staring at you anyway. And I had an American minivan, so you kind of stuck out. And finding parking was not fun sometimes. I'll tell you about trying to park a minivan in Amsterdam sometime. That's another story for another day. But there was a train ride involved from the parking spot. That's how far out we had to go. But the thing about it is, especially with a young family, they were just gobsmacked that you had a large family and that you were traveling. Like it just took people off guard. It's like, you have this large family and you're traveling. And then I started learning why. I was like, okay, for a family of 6 to travel in Germany, you're basically almost automatically at least upper middle class or higher economically just to be able to do that.
Mm.
Driving in Germany is a very much middle class and up thing because you just can't afford it really, because you have to pay to go to the classes and you got to pay for the insurance and you got to pay German taxes. You got, you only have 2 tax brackets in Germany. It's 40, I forget. It's like 42 and 48 or 44 and 48. It's one or the other. There's only 2 tax brackets. And then you got the VAT tax on top of that. So you're paying 60% taxes for everything but food and healthcare basically. And you just start learning how taxation and government and how the different systems affect things like people don't have large families because you just can't afford it. Mm-hmm. Literally, you just can't afford to have that many kids or you're going to be because the way the system's set up. And you just learn intrinsically things that you just take for granted in America. Like, it's no big deal to go to a restaurant and see a family of 3 or 4 kids. You never see that in Europe, hardly ever, especially, Western Europe, France, Germany. You never see small families like that in you growing. You don't see it in England that much anymore, unless it's an immigrant family.
Well,
it's things like that hits you.
I mean, America, though, you do have a declining birth rate. That's the thing, even Americans.
Yeah. But we hear that, but then you don't ever really see it. You don't see it in my family. Then, it used to be my little cousins that are all 10, 12 years younger than me. They're all having like 3, 4, 5 kids each, but that's our family. We're weird about stuff like that. We like to breed, folks. We're doing our part for the birth rate. But, I got 4 daughters and they're all adults now. And they're all, my oldest is getting ready to have my first grandchild here. And in fact, I can't travel. They're actually at the baby shower today for the grandbaby that's coming end of August. So that's the stage of life we're at now, where the kids are all adults and they're starting to have their own families. And you start thinking, and I'm missing my family reunion today, which I hate. That family reunion is because it's my mom's family. It's the house my grandmother moved into when they lost their house to eminent domain. It's the house my mom grew up in. It's now my parents' house. They've lived there for 30 odd years now, and it's those 10, they had 10 kids, one died in the 50s. 9 of them lived until the 90s and 2000s. And you just think generationally how things work. And then you hear things about birth rates. And I know the birth rate's a problem, but this is getting long-winded. And I don't want to just riff on this, but people don't understand. It's like, okay, there's only 2 ways to grow a country and there's only 2 ways to fuel an economy. You have a high birth rate or you have high immigration. The reason America exploded is because we had both at the same time. Especially, and when and people forget their history, we had an immigration freeze for a long time. Like, there was no immigration in America for quite a while. And then when you had immigration plus the post-World War II boom.
Or certain kinds that were shut out. Yeah.
Yeah, they shut it out. And let's not rehash all that now. But when you have immigration and a birth rate cranking, boom, And you see what happens after World War II in America. And America's kind of been living and drifting all that ever since, frankly, economically. I just do not understand for the life of me. And I know why it is, because it's just, there's no other excuse but prejudice, really. If you're not going to have a birth rate, you got to have immigration. And I want legal immigration. You need to weed people out. You need to vet them. I'm not saying just open borders. I'm not that guy. But the idea that you're going to have no immigration and you're going to have no birth rate, that's the end of you as a people. That's it. You're done. It's over. So I do not understand for the life of me these people that think they're going to browbeat people into a higher birth rate and we're going to get rid of immigration, but we're also going to have this state-run corruption thing where everybody gets all the money they want. Like, no, that math don't math. But that's what we're getting pitched.
I mean, the interesting thing is the US, as I said, immigrants to America tend to assimilate and do far better than other countries. So it's always weird for me to hear Americans be Americans who are extremely anti-immigration, because it's like, well, actually, it worked for the most part in the US. People, you tend to attract the best and the brightest and people who want to be there. And we get that too here to an extent. But it's the US. The US's superpower, as it were, is that you do have this identity that people can adapt before they even come there. This whole idea of Americans who are born abroad and coming home, that's as you said, that's absolutely necessary, especially now with the declining birth rates.
Does the birth rate? How's the birth? Because you're a single guy still, famously star of reality television.
Let's not get into that.
I wasn't going to bring it up. I'm just laying that out there. You're still a single guy, so your perspective is a little different than me. And the English perspective is very different than the American would. Like, when people just go on these rants about the birth rate, how's it land with you? Like, because it's one of those things where they're putting policy language on it, but it's really not a policy argument at all once you start listening to them. Because they don't have to do the policy stuff to make the birth rate better. They just want to rant about demographics and they want a socially acceptable way to discuss it. Is that how you find it? Because that's kind of where it goes, especially on social media when I try to follow it.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, the only thing is, I do think it's important that, people have kids, but I don't want kids myself, absolutely not. But yeah, often the people who bring it up they tend to be a bit weird. You're going to the Elon Musk types who they're constantly trying about the birth rate. They have this idea of, I want a trad wife and have 5 kids, and it's just a complete fantasy. It's not based in reality at all. There are ways to talk about it, but I suppose ultimately, to an extent, declining birth rates is just simply a result of the fact that women have more rights now. 100 years ago, women didn't have that many rights.
See, now that's where you start causing trouble really fast, is people get, women have more rights now. And you just said the magic word for a lot of the online guys. Well, they want the trad wife.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean by trad wife? Like, it's the old, stoic thing. Like, what do you mean by trad wife? What's a trad wife to you? Explain trad wife to me. I promise you, I've raised 4 daughters. None of them are going to be trad wives. And I'm very proud that they're not going to be. It's not that they don't have traditional values. It's not that I didn't teach them to be, upright women and behave themselves and love their country and love their God and, not be stark raving heathens and burn things down and act crazy and all that. Not that they won't have their moments or have had their moments. But none of them are going to be trad wives. I promise you. Like, you're going to have your hands full. Go shoot your shot, fellas. You're going to have your hands full. I promise you.
Well, the trad wife thing is basically essentially like playing. It's playing dolls for. It's essentially like playing with little dolls for these very strange sort of hard right men.
Go ahead and blow the comments up. I don't care. There's people that want to do that, and that's fine. I believe in freedom. If you want to do that, God bless. Knock yourself out. Run your YouTube channel. I don't care. But there's a strand of that is very, very much cosplaying for some very nefarious means. And that's not everybody. I know look, if you want to do that lifestyle, God bless, I'll support your right to do it to the end. But there's a very toxic strand of that stuff that is just cover story for some really dark and twisted stuff. And you hit on it. Well, one of the things with the birth rate is, 1 is medical science, and 2 is women have more rights. And you know what? Women should have more rights. Yeah. I think women not dying during childbirth like they used to do is a really good thing. I think women having freedom to have careers and be out of the home is a really good thing. But there's some people that don't think that's a good thing, but they found nomenclature to make it socially acceptable to say otherwise.
Exactly. And I think the problem is you've got the rise of these manosphere figures, which I think is sort of slightly before, it came about sort of after I was a teenager. It was sort of came about in the last 10 years. And apparently, from what I've heard, that people, younger generations, quite a few young men, have some horrendous views, but likewise, young women are quite extreme as well. And it's this whole idea of social media turning young men and women.
But you're the target audience.
Poles apart.
You're 30. What are you, 31, 32 now?
32.
God, we're getting old, man. I remember when you were the young guy. You're 32 now. You're not married. You're the target audience for those guys. Yeah. You're who they're supposed to be like. You're supposed to be frustrated and angry and mad at the world, and darn those women that are keeping the man down. Like, you're the target audience for it.
Yeah.
You escape that somehow because you know how to read and write, number one. But, really, you're supposed to be the target audience for that. So what do you say because I'm sure you run into people that get sucked into that stuff. Especially, we just talked about it in the UK. If you're going to have housing crisis and job crisis with that 20 to 40 demographic of male, those are people that are ripe to fall into that kind of crap. So I'm sure you're running into it. So how do you deal with it?
Well, I think for me, I've got a very individualistic outlook. Like, to me, it's not about your sex or your race or whatever. It's as a person. I think people should have the freedom, and it's all about freedom and individual responsibility. And I just don't. Women have just as much of a right to date who they want as men do, and it's the idea that you're owed something is ridiculous. And I think modern dating is quite badly optimized. I think both men and women suffer from it, but I don't think it's the fault of women. I think it's just the fault of the way it works now. Dating is all online now. It's not really that spontaneous. It's very sort of commodified, and that's not there. Women don't benefit from either. The current system is not really serving men or women. It's young men and women are being sort of driven further apart from each other, and it's quite sad to see, really, that it's becoming that way. You see, women who hate men who hate women. I just don't understand why, because it's like, well, people are individuals. And I know it sounds very, very sort of almost hippie-like and very silly, but it's still the truth. People are individuals, and you have to treat people as individuals. You can't just tie everyone on the same brush.
Yeah, and you were writing about this with your piece on America, so that we don't get too far chasing too many chickens here. That's an American term for you English folks. We also chase rabbits. My father always said, well, you're chasing the rabbit. You need to come back now. When you talk about individual freedom, I remember the first time I did major UK media, a media hit. I think it was Times Radio. Yeah, it was the first time I did Times Radio. Really big outlet, important outlet, good outlet. I listen to them all the time. They do really good work. They sent me a 2-page disclaimer that I had to sign and send back to them before I could get on the air.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you do this for everybody? They're like, no, just our Americans. Like, literally, I've got the email. They're like, no, we just do this with Americans the first time because they don't know any better. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know any better? I have been on Progressive. I've been on Young Turks multiple times. I've been on network TV. I've been on small podcasts. I've been on regional radio. I've done everything in America. I swear the truth. I have never once been told what to say or what not to say on air on an American platform. I've never been told what to write. Some of that's because I know better than to go to certain places, but I've never been told what to write, what I couldn't do. I'm not talking about editing. I mean, like, my opinion. I've never been told once not to do anything other than, don't curse on air, because obviously you don't want to catch an FCC fine. They sent me this 2-page thing of things that you can and can't say. And they're like, no, we only do this for Americans because they don't know any better. That's literally what I got told. And it was stuff like, you don't think about it, but like the example, because we were talking about a court case, they said you cannot say somebody committed a crime unless they've actually been convicted of the crime in the UK, because their libel laws are so different.
Yeah.
So like they literally lay it out point by point, like, if he is on trial, he has been accused. Even if you know they did it, you cannot say they committed the crime until they are convicted of the crime. And then you still can't say it. You can only say they've been convicted of the crime. Like, it was this whole thing that it was like an example they walk you through of what you can and can't say, because they don't have freedom of speech. It's pretty lenient, but they have very, very, they don't have the press freedoms where I can say pretty much everything. One, if you try to sue me, as long as I don't run out of money, I'm going to win probably, unless they can prove I slandered you. And it's not like that in the UK.
No. And
then politically, their example, I'll never forget this. Their example was somebody in Parliament saying something. Somebody that stood up in Parliament and tells a bald-faced lie in the House of Commons I cannot go on TV and say they lied. Like I
Yeah.
literally can't say they lied. You can't. And I was like, that ain't true. So I went and looked, and sure, you cannot call somebody a liar on TV in the UK.
Yeah.
And it just blew my mind because, like, I can sit here and say Donald Trump's a liar, Barack Obama's a liar. I can say it till I'm blue in my face. They literally say if they stand up in the house and they say that, you can't say it even if you know it's true.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. But I don't think people in America, like, it made me appreciate, number one. And number two is, like, it's such a subtle difference on paper, but in practice, that is a chasm when it comes to freedom of speech.
Well, I would take them saying Americans don't know any better. I would take that as a big compliment because, and this is something.
I did. I should have printed it and put it on the wall. I love
this.
It.
Is something
like, we don't know any better.
I love.
Darn freedom people.
The First Amendment is an absolutely wonderful thing, and this idea of protecting speech, even if you don't agree with it, is something that's always been very important to me. It's. As I said in the article, we don't really, free speech protections generally in America are so much stronger. And it's this idea that, it's there in the First Amendment. You can't get around it. That's one of the reasons why Trump has come up against so many problems with the courts, because he keeps trying to get around it, because his instinct is not for that. But it's, over here, there's lots of there's a lot of social media problems. Someone will say something on social media, it's not a crime, but then the police have what's called non-crime hate incidents, and it's like, well, if that's not a crime, then why are you even getting involved in it? And it's like, how do we get to this stage in the first place? Like, I understand there's got to be some sort of protections for defamation, I suppose, but it's this is something America, in my opinion, definitely does a lot better in the US. It definitely does a lot better than the UK. When it comes to the way you treat speech and the way you treat those sorts of things.
It's self-defeating because now you have the thing where you're having these incidences and they're becoming viral video for different groups with violence, and then you have the police actively trying to get people to just take down the social media, and that just feeds into the bad faith actors even worse. So the lack of freedom actually feeds into it, and you make the problem 10 times worse by not having the freedom. And because the viral lie goes around so fast, and then the second stage of that story is not, well, here's what actually happened. It's the police are trying to keep you from seeing the truth. So now it's not even the first second. Now, whatever the actual truth of what happens is like the third or fourth cycle down the road, and it's got no chance. And it's just the not having ugly freedom is always better than curated tyranny. Because the more you try to curate it, the worse you're going to make it, and the more pushback you're going to get. And I think, and I'm watching this with our UK friends right now on the immigration stuff, the violence in the street stuff, the migrant stuff, really, really ugly stuff that's happening, and stuff that needs an honest, sober answer, both law enforcement and legal and moral answers to a lot of this stuff. But you're not going to get there because you're stuck in this argument about whether or not people can see the video. That's a bad place to be, my friend. That's a really bad place to be as a culture and a society.
Well, we're quite a nannying country, and I've said this in my article. I said, we tend to be very, the nanny state here is very strong, and often it's at the behest of people themselves. There was an infamous sort of poll done just after COVID, and it was like, what COVID restrictions would you like to see permanently? And I think 1 in 5 people wanted to shut nightclubs and bars permanently after COVID. And it's like, how's personal choice? This was after COVID. They weren't saying shut it during COVID. They were saying shut it for good. And it's just, for some reason, I don't know what it is. Maybe there's probably some historical reason for it, which I'm not smart enough to grasp. But there's obviously something in the British psyche which just loves having the government tell you what to do. They love having the government banning stuff. They love having the government bossing you around. And I get there's benefits to that. There's some benefits to that, because the US is almost like, well, you're free, but you're free to be poor. You're free to you sort of have less of a safety net. But that appeals to me personally. I get why it doesn't appeal to some people, but this to me is what I like about America, is that you do have, the government is, if not totally off your back, it's moving at a lot slower pace than it is here, because here we just ban stuff left, right, and center all the time.
See, that's a perspective thing that Americans, I think, take for granted.
Mm.
Is when you're overseas or you live in another country. You know, I lived in Germany twice for about 5 years altogether, two different times. Two different, by the way, two very different eras, because the first time was under the Schroeder era, where there was a lot of anti-American sentiment from the, not from the people, but from the government. That was
Yeah.
when Iraq, and we now know, Schroeder was on the Gazprom.
Yeah.
He was corrupt with the Russians. So he was saying really ugly stuff about Americans, and it was uncomfortable for some. Not from the average people were great to us. It wasn't that, but politically it wasn't fun. So most Americans, I've said this, one downfall of Americans as a people, you need to go somewhere where you don't speak the language and try to navigate it. And you need to be somewhere where the news item is how your country's bad. And you're like, wait a minute, I got to live here every day, and you're getting bashed. So now when I sit here and analyze the news and we're talking about immigration or some of these other issues, it's like, okay, I maybe know 1% of what that maybe feels like, because I had that experience of living in a foreign country where the leader of that country is absolutely bashing you as a horrible human being just because of where you're from. You've been through that at a very, very small level, not like what some people have been just absolutely persecuted. Americans don't travel as much as they probably should, and they don't get that world perspective. So when you say that, it's something I just don't think Americans understand how good we have it, because we take it for granted and we think, well, this is an oppression of our freedom, and it is, but it's on this level. But because we don't have a perspective on it, we don't understand the rest of the world's already up here on the oppression level. And I don't know how to explain it to people, because it really does have to be experienced. You have to be somewhere else where you're not as free as you are daily before you ever even think about it.
I think it's
because you're just so used to it.
I think
it's a fish and water kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but I think it's also a mindset. I think a lot of people in other countries outside the US, they view government as the main government's job is to protect, actively protect people. Whereas Americans, it seems to be more like the government's job, and this is my view too, is to sort of protect basic things, but let you figure out yourself. It's more big on self-reliance, and I think it's just a matter of perspective. And I totally do get that. Some people, they prefer the other what we have here. But this is the American sort of view on government is quite unique. Most countries do not have that. It's very much a group saying, government, help us, save us. They want the government to step down, to come down, and sort things out for them. And Americans are not quite as into that, it seems.
You talked about in your piece, and again, it's in the chat link. It's also up on ordinary-times.com. You started talking about it, and I want to pull the quote because I want to make sure I say this right. And you put it this way. You said there's a deeper, more intangible element to Americans' relationship with freedom due to no small part to their history as a nation which rebelled. Americans tend to be much warier of government intervention in their daily lives and less hostile to the concept of personal wealth. I believe that's true. I think it's still true by the majority. I also think that's the edges that are getting worn down right now in our political system, and why we're seeing so much problems, because the edge of that gets worn down is not, we pose it as capitalism versus socialism, but that's not really what it is. The edge of that's getting worn down is unaccountable government and corruption. I think that's where that's getting chewed up, and that's the beef I have with the Trump administration. That's the beef I've had with other administrations, like the Clinton administration, that had a lot of corruption involved in it. We're going to have more corrupt government coming up because now it's more ingrained. I think the leading edge of losing what you just said made us special isn't really political or ideology. I think it's good old-fashioned laziness, greed, not holding our government accountable. And I think the corruption is going to tear us apart way before the politics ever get to it. But we just want to talk about the politics because that's easier in dealing with the corruption.
Yeah. Well, the irony is, of course, that American Trump and sort of the MAGA movement, they often talk about, the third world and importing the third world. They say, we don't want these immigrants here because they bring the third world with them. But the irony is that the Trump and his sort of cronies are so third worldist in the way they have this corruption. It's someone from afar, I can see this is not American at all. Like this idea of using the government to sort of divvy out things to your friends and allies. That is not really an American thing. That's very much a third world thing. And it's kind of ironic that they're supposed to be this vanguard of American values, and actually they're, if anything, the Trump administration is the one that's importing this sort of stuff. They want to bring this into America, and it's like, why do you want to do that? Because I've seen people on the right, sort of more intellectual types, who say, well, the government should be used to punish our enemies, etc., and reward our allies, and that's just not what government should be about. I don't want to see left or right governments do it. It doesn't matter if my side's in power. I don't want my side to be acting like this. It's just wrong.
But that's the thing, is it's gimme, gimme, gimme now. Mm. And then they want to play the victims when it flips the other way, and the other people do the exact same thing that you just set them up for. I got so frustrated. Going back to the Supreme Court decisions of the past week, I got so frustrated with the cover, and maybe it's because I'm a writer and an editor, and I think, I have this problem when I read something now. I think of the form factor of it before I think of the actual content of it. I got so sick of, I'm talking big name. I don't want to pick on, like, New York Times, Washington Post, but like all the big publications are like, Supreme Court gives Trump the power. No, they didn't.
Yeah.
They gave the president power. The next president isn't going to give that power back. Whether it's, President generic Democrat or President generic Republican or whoever the next they didn't give President Trump. I'm so tired of this coverage, and I understand why you do it, and it's SEO, and it's making sure it clicks through, and I get all that. And Trump's the best thing that ever happened to the news media business in my lifetime, by far. You got to get Trump in a headline. I get it. The Supreme Court did not rule for or against Trump. They're ruling for or against executive power. So the executive power got some really big wins this week, and the executive power got some really key, in my opinion, very important losses this week. They should have all been losses, but that, we'll rehash that some other time. We have this absolute navel-gazing tendency in politics and media right now, where it's just all immediate, and we don't think long-term at all.
Yeah.
And we don't understand, like, do you realize, like, we're well into Donald Trump's lame duck era. Like, really, after the midterms, it'll be really apparent, because it's going to be ugly for the Republicans, I think. Although I never discount our Democratic friends' ability to blow an easy election, but they should be able to do really well here. But Trump is so temporary, man. And some of this is I never believed my dad. He's just like, look, there's no substitute for experience. That was always his line. It's like, and he was a teacher. He's an educator for his whole career. He's like, I can teach you whatever. I can teach you anything but experience. There's no substitute for experience. Maybe it's just getting older and having the experience of how temporary this stuff is. Because I'm on my 7th, 8th president, whatever it is. I mean, Carter when I was born, but I was a baby. So really Reagan, the 2 Bushes, Clinton, Obama, and then Trump and Biden. That's been my lifetime. And really, Clinton was the first election I really paid attention to. It was the first election I voted in. It was 98 midterm, which was the impeachment. It's like, I heard all these same arguments during the Clinton administration when they did the impeachment there. It's just, reversed roles. Yeah. And the people that said we have to have Clinton in power because he's such a good liar. There's people on national television going, he lies so well, we just got to admire how well he lies. That happened on the Talking Head shows. I sat there and watched it. And the corruption and the bad stuff was swept under the rug because he was a Democrat. And then one of his best friends for years and years, the Clintons and Trump were always friends until politics got involved. Guess what we're doing? Well, we got to have the corruption because look what he's doing for all of us. Yeah, under the table, money-wise. Like, it's the same crap. And it's just my side, your side. And Trump's just taking it to a biblical level. We just got the data this week where he's made, $2 billion just in this term already. Just got him and his family. Let me be specific. Yeah. It's corruption so it's corruption so vast that people can't even see it because it's so big in front of them. They don't know what they're looking at.
People don't care. People just it's all about their side. They want their side to get a win. It's like, as I said, it's like a football game.
What are you winning? That's it. I had this conversation with somebody who's been 50 years. We disagree politically. I said, what are you winning by hitching your star to this politician? I'll leave the politician unnamed. Because it doesn't matter. It's interchangeable. Like, what are you winning by, like, they're our employees. Don't fall in love with your politicians. Fall in like, because at some point you're going to need to jettison them because they're employees. Mm. I don't work for Trump. Trump works for me. I'm a citizen of this country. He's not my king. He's not my Christ. he's an employee. But I got these people on social media that are like, no, you got to do what the president says. The hell I do. What kind of American are you?
And you're like, what do you get out of it? You're absolutely right. At least when when Villa won the Europa League, for example. Sorry to bring it back to Villa, but when we won the Europa League, I get that personal satisfaction of we've won something. Here's my Villa shirt with winners 26 on the back, champions 26. What do you get when your politician wins some sort of political battle? You get nothing. It's just and the people that you're celebrating with, they'll stab you in the back over something else anyway. At least with a sports team, we'll be together and you'll be as one, for the long haul. But in politics, everyone stabbed each other in the back. I've seen it so many times. People are allies one second and then they're bitter enemies the next. And it's just, well, why do you want to live in that sort of environment? I've worked in politics and I just don't get it.
Well, talk about that for a second, because you just saw this happen. I don't want to get into the weeds on reform, because we're going to have to deal with that. Look, that's going to be the story all next year when we do the general election. So I don't want to get too into the weeds I don't want to shoot all our wad on reform right now. But you literally stood there and watched people, to beat the metaphor to death. You just watched people switch sides of the hallway when reform came to power last year. Like, you were there. You stood there and watched people like, I'm a Tory. Okay, now I'm going to be reform because that's the new hotness. And you just watched them run back and forth. You stood there and watched that happen. Like, you're not just saying that. You watched it in real time recently.
Yeah.
Talk about that for folks, because they saw the Twitter announcements and the people like, I am now standing with Reform UK. Like, they see all that. You're in the hallways when that happened. You talk to the staffers because you were one, and talk about it from behind the scenes of like when people switch sides and it's just blatantly, not that they don't have any standards whatsoever, but so many of them it's just blatant opportunism. Talk about it from being inside government and watching that happen in real time.
Well, when I was in a couple of years ago, I think people switching then, it was more sort of, I'm doing it for ideological reasons, which I can sort of understand. But since the election, when it became clear that Reform won the up and the Tories won the down, you have seen it. MPs or former MPs who have, former Tory MPs who lost their seats in the last election. You see them defect to Reform, and it's so obvious why they're doing it. They're doing it because they want that safe seat. They view Reform as being the next thing to hitch their wagon to, and it's just a bit, well, it's a bit transparent what they're doing. And I know I've got a couple of friends who did defect to Reform for ideological reasons, and I get that. But it does sort of feel a bit shallow. They're doing it because they want to be on the winning team. It's not because they won't actually care about what happens.
Do you think? Again, I don't want to go too into weeds on reform, because that's all we're going to talk about for the next 2-3 years in UK politics, I'm afraid. Did it surprise you, this latest polling, a little bit with the Burnhams? We've talked about this before, but I just want to ask you, since we're on the topic. There is this thing. Do you think reform peaked a little too early?
Possibly. I do think so. I mean, I think the only thing is that Reform are being subjected to the same pressures that the Tories were. So, so Reform have restored.
Well, not to interrupt you, but that's their own fault, because I think they made a tactical thing where it wasn't we oppose the Tories. They openly ran on, we're going to replace the Tories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they kind of set themselves up for. I know they didn't get covered that way in the West, in American media especially, but that they didn't say we're going to run against them. They said we're going to replace them. So you kind of put that jacket on yourself, did you not?
Yeah, but then of course they're getting done by Restore, who were started by a former Reform MP, and the same thing happening. So basically, the 2024 election, dozens of MPs, Tory MPs, including my own then boss, lost their seats because of Reform standing and splitting the vote. That is now happening to Reform. For example, in the Makerfield by-election that Burnham won, I think he would have won anyway, but it's the same thing happening. Restore are sort of standing as the real voice of the right, and Reform are now complaining, just like we were, about them splitting the vote. So it's kind of ironic this is happening. I don't know. I think momentum's a funny thing, and I think a lot of it depends on how the Tories do and how Burnham does. And I'm not hopeful on Burnham. I don't see him as fundamentally different to Starmer. He's just Starmer, but with North added in, this whole Northern thing. But we'll wait and see.
I'm glad you brought that up. Let me ask you one more thing on this topic, and I want to come back to America for a minute while we still have time. But because this is the 4th of July, and we want to celebrate, us taking belt ass to you twice. I love you. I'm teasing. The Burnham. I'm going to spend half my time in Manchester, King of the North stuff. And I love Sky News. I love you guys, but quit slathering this guy. I know he's going to be better for ratings than Starmer because he's better on TV, so he's better for ratings. But Sky News needs to calm down. They're way too excited about Burnham. BBC's even worse. I'm gonna split time. It's gonna be Downing Street, number 10 North. I'm King of the North, which, to be fair, it's not him saying the King of the North part, but he's talking Downing Street North. I'm gonna make the Chancellor work out of Manchester. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, okay, Starmer was elected to be the steady non-chaos guy, and then got swallowed up by steady chaos immediately. If you're gonna start out with a gimmick, which is what this is. It's a gimmick. If you're going to open up with your first big thing being a gimmick, I don't see how this doesn't automatically blow up in his face right off the bat just from it being a gimmick, because you number one, it's just not going to work. Number two is you're going to tick everybody off because all you did was expand government for no good reason, make everything 10 times harder to do just to make a constituency that you already dominate happy. And I know they think they're going to scale that up to the rest of the Midlands and the North and everywhere else, but I think there was some Manchester-specific stuff that makes him popular that I don't know translates to all those old Tory seats that went Labour and then went back to Reform and now restores the problem. I think if you open with a gimmick is a strategic error, because if you open with a gimmick and the gimmick we already know is probably not going to work, I don't see where he does any better than Starmer in the next 18 months, just based off that, if nothing else. That's before you get to the structural problems.
No, I agree. In my opinion, he will be as unpopular as Starmer within 9 months. I think if you come in even sooner, if you come in and you've got all these problems, and people, I think a lot of people don't realise necessarily what the cause of the problems are, but they can certainly see, everything's getting expensive and nothing works. There aren't any jobs. People are having these big problems, and if you come in and your response to that is, well, let's bring numbers out north. I don't really see. It's all downhill from here. I really do think that. I don't really see what you're trying to achieve with that.
If you're going to be King of the North, the house motto for the King of the North and the Starks was "Winter is coming," and you just talked about it. Winter killed the labor movement dead.
Yeah,
like without exaggeration, they didn't survive the first winter.
Yeah.
How are they going to survive the first winter with the energy crisis they got going on? The EU's not going to throw him a lifeline anytime soon. They're that's going to take some time. I don't see how they survive the winter.
No, I agree completely.
Because those energy prices, and I mean, it's going to be the same problem again this year, right?
He's not willing to tackle them. So if all you've got is gimmicks, then nothing's going to change. So, I mean, maybe it'll surprise us. Maybe it'll surprise us, but I am not hopeful. I'm willing to give him a chance, and if he does, do these reforms, I will hold my hand up and say, "Fair play, Andy Burnham. That's what we need," but I just can't see it. I'm cynical.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate, I could see a path where he just doesn't do anything incredibly stupid. It stabilizes a little bit.
Yeah.
And then Reform, Restore, and the Tories all tear themselves to shreds and they squeak through, or at least get a coalition type government or something of that. I could see that happening. But I just don't like starting on a gimmick, because I think that defeats the entire point of let's just stabilize everything first and then see what we can get out of it, which should be the theory of it, because of what I just said. Reform and Restore and the Tories are all going to be fighting for the same piece of pie. Why don't you want to be kind of the steady, we're going to stand over here and run the government while that's all happening? Then you got an argument.
Yeah.
And you start with a gimmick, it's going to be, oh no, more chaos. And then your chaos doesn't look any different than this chaos over here, just electorally. I don't think that's going to work.
It won't. I'll tell you now, it won't. As I said, it will be, there's an argument you made that maybe Starmer should have just, if you're Labour, Starmer should have just stayed on, taken more of the hits, and then, have Labour peaked, have Labour gone too early by bringing Burnham in. I don't know. They could well have done. All
right, back to America, because it's 4th of July. And I love this piece. I've already put it out on my social media. I'll keep pumping it up. I know we joke about it, but there still is the special relationship between the UK and England, especially in America. We know the Scot-Irish tradition, especially places where I'm from. I'm a Donaldson, so the Scot-Irish tradition is very much my family history. The Welsh coal miner stuff from West Virginia, that's a strong thing. Our pepperoni roll came from your hand pie. We can talk about that. There's all those ties that will always bind one way or the other. But for you personally, you can talk about the big ticket freedom stuff, but personally, when you start talking freedom in America, just talk about what that means to you and why it's so different. Because you talked about it. I talked about when I went to Europe, it feels different. When you come here, it felt different to you.
Yeah, it did, and it was. I mean, I know it's a silly thing, but like, just for example, that you go into a bar and they serve plastic straws, because in here, plastic straws are de facto banned, and it's just.
It's one thing Trump did that I was all for. I'm like, yep, that's good, Trump. I like that. Let's get.
But yeah, look, if businesses want to
done,
not use plastic, then fair play to them, fine. But to me, my issue is this idea of the government dictating it. And that's the problem. And that's what I think you have less of in America, because you've got this decentralized, federalized system, because you've got this sort of culture of less government intervention. It's just different. And it just feels a bit more. It's funny. Just going back briefly to Starmer. When Starmer came to power, he said that he was going to bring a government that treaded more lightly on people's lives, and he did the exact opposite. And that's what I like about the US, is that the government does tread a bit more lightly on your lives in general. And this is what freedom means to me, and this is what America's always stood for. And I'm not claiming that America is better in every regard. It's just what I personally prefer, and I think it's preference at the end of the day.
There's a media term called headroom. I think America, you just have more headroom for success.
Yeah,
and
I think you've got more. You can fall further as well. I think you can fall further. There's less of a net there. There's also more of potential.
It's funny because we were talking about the stat with some friends the other day about how, and I think the Trump administration even brought up how the UK per capita GDP is on trend with Mississippi, our poorest state. And it's not a fair comparison, because once you do import export and the full trappings of a country, it's not exactly completely fair. But yeah, one on one, Americans are wealthier than the rest of the world, and it's not particularly close for the most part. And it's to the extent where they don't realize it. They really don't.
And the gap's grown as well. The gap's grown in the last 20 years.
The gap is and I know people are going to start screaming about the billionaires and all that. Like, yeah, but there's a drag effect to that too, because you don't, you never worked for a company ran by the guy on minimum wage. Your company's run by the millionaires and billionaires. They hire people. That's how it works. Not that we shouldn't be taxing them and all. That's I don't want to go down that road. They need to pay their fair share too, but you can't tax them unless you have a coherent tax code. So that's a cart before the horse argument. You put it directly in your piece. I thought it was funny. You brought up the Yeltsin in the supermarket picture, which is really funny. Again, living in Germany, being in the UK, the markets are pretty good. I notice a difference. There is less variety. There is less stuff. Even a mega thing like a Walmart or an Aldi. We got Aldi now. Everybody loves Aldi here, which is a German brand. But little things like the marketplace macro, the market, and then the marketplace micro, where you actually go and do consumer goods, you can tell a big difference if you look really close. And it is just as simple as the way a grocery store is set up in England or Germany or the EU compared to the US, and the logistics of how they get it and the way they do it. I remember my landlord in Germany ran a company that was it'd be like it's like a self home improvement store. Like, they sold the home improvement, but they also sent out the work crews to do the work on top of it. So he had like a trucking company and a building company and a store all wrapped into one business. And I was actually renting his childhood home, because generational homes much more common in Germany. So I remember going to his business, and he was explaining how his business was set up, because I had to go pay my rent. And he was explaining how he paid his drivers and how he paid his stores. And we got into really deep, and I have a transportation background professionally. We got really deep into the differences, and I was just like, man, the logistics in America are just, you can't even explain how much better the logistics and transportation in America is compared to Europe. Like, it's not even close. Like, it's just night and day, the transportation difference. Things like that drive an economy, and we don't ever talk about it, but you see it when you go to the market. And those are the things, those are the freedoms that I think America takes for granted. That's the secret sauce to our economy that I think Americans take for granted. But you don't see it until you go to a store in another country and go, well, how come they only have this, this, and this, and they don't have, why don't I have 4 different kinds of oranges to choose from? It's like, well, because you don't have the logistics.
Well, I think a lot of discontent comes from social media to an extent, because it's like people are seeing social media, they're seeing people who are doing better than them. But what a lot of Americans don't seem to realize probably is that, people from outside looking in, and we're saying, well, look at how well Americans are doing compared to us. So it's the same sort of thing. And it's just, I love the World Cup, but the World Cup as a showcase sort of, there's lots of people, Europeans going to America and saying, actually, I thought America was really bad, but actually I really like it here. It's nice to see that. It's nice to see people get a taste of what I've got a taste of. But look, as I said, America's not perfect, and you do some things which I think are silly, and there are some things which I just don't, we do better. But it's just a preference, and I can see why people like that lifestyle. And
except our Scottish friends who figured out that our beer is only 0.5 instead of 11.
Oh, I didn't drink, so that doesn't bother me.
Well, I don't drink anymore either, but I just found it funny. They had this guy. He's like, man, I got to drink. They're like, they're giving us a bad name. We have to drink 3 times as much to get the same alcohol because your beer sucks. It's like, okay, fair point. Oh gosh, but no, I want to bring up too, because this is also in your piece. Again, it's linked in the chat. Go read it. It's a fantastic piece. We talked about American exceptionalism. I want to talk about one more of those jingleless things as kind of a way to round this up, because I could talk to you all day, my friend. And we haven't even got to baseball yet. You talk about the American dream, but you talked about it personally as I come here and I dream about it, and then it kind of fades, and then I come back and it comes roaring back. And you talked about, your recent trip to Boston, which, is just all kinds of American history. And, a lot of the founding stuff of America comes out of Boston. It's just one of those seminal places. So obviously why that would be there. Our national anthem's about Boston, for crying out loud. Talk about that for a minute, because it becomes a jingle, just, the American dream, kind of like American exceptionalism we opened with. But talk about that American dream thing, because there are people around the world that still has American dream. We're just saying America really does mean that to them. It's just a byword for potential and possibilities. And it really is a dreamland. It is their never, never land, just saying the word America, to ever get just visit here, let alone live here or become an American. Talk about that for a minute, because I think it's striking that halfway through your piece, you grabbed on American dream, but you made it personal.
Well, it's interesting because I've been to quite a few states in America now. I've not seen as much of America as I would like to have at this point. There's still many places I need to see. Funny enough, actually, most places I've been to America are blue states. That's not intentional, just the way it's worked. I need to see more of the flyover states, as they're derisively
called. All the airports are, man. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it works.
But I've seen, and I've seen. The interesting thing about this Boston show I went on last time is I actually saw more of real America and less touristy stuff than I did in previous trips. So when I was there, I went to not 1, not 2, but 3 trivia nights. You call them. We call them pub quizzes, but trivia nights. And I really enjoyed it. And I got to hang out with local people, in bars that were not in the center of Boston. They were more out, out further out. And I saw more of real America. And it's just, there's something about the lifestyle. And look, I get that a holiday's a holiday and that real life is different. I'm not trying to pretend otherwise. But there's something about the lifestyle which I just prefer. It's just a vibe. I know it sounds really wishy-washy and really silly. And, this isn't me trying to say you should move to America. Everyone else should move to America. This is just me saying why I would like to possibly move there one day. And as I said, if I won the lottery, I would split my time between the US and the UK. That would be what I would do 100% if money was no object. And it's just, there's something about it. It's the place where things happen. I can see why many would find it off-putting. I totally get that. The homicide rate is much higher. There's less of a safety net. I get that. But there's just something about America. And I think I'm vindicated here by the fact that so many people feel the same way. And as I said, I'm not saying to anyone who's listening out there, you should move to America. It's just why I personally would possibly like to do it one day.
It's funny too, because I've got enough UK friends over the years now that the UK's got some very distinct lines of demarcation to different areas. Even London itself has some splits in it. The Midlands are different. Yorkshire's different. The North is different. There's some real division. Man, this thing with Burnham, we're criticizing a little bit, but no, Manchester versus London, that's a real thing. That's a thing. and not just in soccer, like just mentality wise, like America, people, I think one thing that took foreigners by, let me take foreigners back because that sounds hard. What took visitors back, because this World Cup really designed is like, I think you just saw over and over in the social media is they realize how vast and diverse. People do not understand the diversity of America.
Yeah.
Like you can go anywhere in England and there's differences between Yorkshire and Portsmouth, but there's a very strong English through line. I can take you to New York City and then take you to parts of West Virginia, and you're going to wonder how that's the same country.
Yeah.
And then I can take you to the deep South and then take you to the Pacific Northwest. And you're going to be like, there's no way this is the same country.
Well, I went to Rhode Island from Boston, and it was even there. And Rhode Island's like an hour away. Even Rhode Island had its own distinct identity. And most people in the UK have never heard of Rhode Island, besides maybe from Family Guy. But even then, there was this strong, I remember having a tour of the Rhode Island state capitol, and the tour guide was explaining to me, and she was saying, there was only like 3 of us on the tour, and she was saying, we basically, the revolution happened because of us. And I was like, yeah, but if I ask Boston people what they're going to say, and she said,
well, they'll tour at all the colonies, by the way, every colony will say.
Yeah, they'll say something different, but it really does feel like every state has its own story to tell, and the state identity there is so much stronger. And it feels like there's more there to see. It's more there to experience. And this is why I'd like to go to 50 states in my life. I've been to 12 so far, so I've still got a lot to go. But it's a big country. It's a huge country. People don't realize how big it is, how vast it is, how varied it is. And I can see why people are scared. And it's okay to think, not for me. That's totally fine. I totally get that. 20 years ago, I would have been like, oh, well, how can you not like America? Now I understand it's a taste thing to a large extent. Yeah. It's a taste thing, and it's just something I personally prefer. It's a great country, and you should be proud of it.
See, I think I get my back up when people go after the diversity as our strength thing, because people with prejudices automatically go to the racial part of it, and that is part of it. But no, diversity really is America's strength, because we are one of the literally only massively diverse countries that function.
Yeah.
Like normally, if you have a diverse country, it comes apart at the seams. Look at, the Soviets tried to do, look what the Soviets did in places like Yugoslavia. And when they tried to just look at the Middle East, for God's sakes, where they're 99%, and they'll still kill each other over 1% tribal differences over different things. Same thing in Southeast Asia. Look at Myanmar. Like almost everywhere else in the world, if you have a lot of diversity, you have conflict. I mean, like open warfare conflict. There is no other example in history of the diversity that America has where it works and functions.
Yeah.
And people just do not stop and get over their own prejudices and go, diversity is our strength because we're the only people that's ever made it work right. Because nobody's ever been as diverse as we are. And then we're still the economically and powerful wise, the greatest country that's ever been. And those two things go together, and you can't split them, but people don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, and it's nice to go to America and meet Americans, meet people who have been there, who have roots hundreds of years, but then also meet somebody who's been there, for 10 years, and they see themselves as just as American as the guy who's been there 200 years. And it's as I said, other countries don't really have that, and it's nice to, it's just really, there's something admirable about that. There's something, as I said, America almost represents the human race in a way. It's as I said, a very imperfect representation, but you get all of humanity there.
That's very good. You need to write that down.
Yeah.
Let me be an editor for a second. That's very good. because we are one of the few diverse countries in the world, really truly diverse countries. My children have grown up in a city where I think the racial makeup is like 42, 44, 20 something. White, black, Hispanic. Like that's there's not very many cities in the world like that.
Yeah. And
it's not a major city, but it's just a unique environment. And they grew up, they very worldly because we lived overseas, and they've had different schools, and, dad was in the military, and, they've had a little bit different lifestyle than a lot of kids. But I don't have to explain diversity to my kids. They just, if you tell them diversity is bad, they're going to look at you like you just said the world is flat. Because their lived experience is, no, it's not. This is a good thing.
Well, American diversity works so well. It really does. Right. I think it works in a way other countries, like the diversity in the UK it is, to an extent, it works in a similar way, but it's just not as strong. We don't have that strong identity. I mean, there's been attempts to create a British identity, sort of an artificial one, but we just don't have the roots that you guys do. We don't have that, and it's.
How much of that? Put your history hat on for a second. That's kind of the good and the bad of the Commonwealth, right? Where it's like, and I don't want to rehash colonialism because we all know how colonialism can get evil really quick, and there was some good parts to it, but it got abused pretty badly too. So setting aside the colonial part of it though, but when you have a Commonwealth system where it's like you're in but not of, we're all together but we're all separate, isn't that kind of just ingrained in it that you're going to have kind of trouble getting a unity out of it, even though you're calling it a Commonwealth?
Yeah, exactly. No.
It almost, I don't want to say it's incongruent because that's a little too far, but it's almost like it's baked into the cake of like, we really like you at this arm's distance right here.
Yeah, well, there's been debate on Twitter about some people have been saying, like, some people like Black Britons to other Black Britons have been saying, why do you support an English team, England over DR Congo? And they've said, well, I was born in England, I was raised in England, but in America, I feel like there's less of that sort of. It's like, I'm American, of course I'm going to support America. And personally, this is what I prefer too. Like, to me, like, if you're born in England, you're English. People always often say, oh well, if it wasn't for immigration, the English football team wouldn't have these players. But I think, well, actually, they're all born and raised here, bar one who moved here when he was like 2. But he's still just as English as I am. And I don't like to see this sort of racial nationalism. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I don't know if you saw, but Bosnia had a player that had come up through the American national team system until a couple of years ago, and now he's playing for them. And our guys were letting him know it.
Well, look at
By the end of the game, they were bringing it up.
Well, look at Michael Elise, one of the best players. Plays for Bayern Munich. He's a brilliant player, born and raised in London, but he plays for France because his mum was French, and that grates me a little bit. But what can you do? It's his choice. But he should be playing for England.
Yeah. To wrap this up, because I could just do this all day because I'm sad. I want to be on the hill for the 250th with my family, and I've had some health stuff this week, so I'm being good and behaving myself. But when you think of the future of America, especially from the English perspective, and somebody who has an affinity for America and who's sitting there in a USA jersey looking ridiculous, I swear to God, I was looking for like a Star Spangled something to put on, and I couldn't find anything. I'm like, man, I don't have any patriotic shirts. And then you show up in a U.S. jersey. So thanks a lot for making me look bad. My own country. I do have my Up Yonder shirt on. So from your perspective, though, when we look at the future of America, I am a very cynical person in a lot of ways. I've been trying to work on that. I've told people honestly, though, the last year and a half, and some of it's where I went back to community college and I've just been around some real people, but I've been around a lot of young people lately. My kids are all young adults, so I'm around young people a lot. I've been more encouraged the last year and a half, being around more young people, being in the community college environment with a lot of young people. I think the kids are all right. I think the middle-aged kids and the boomers online are giving a distorted viewpoint of where the next generation's going. I'm very encouraged at this next generation. I don't think they're scared of AI. I think they got a good handle on it. They hate the slop. They like the productivity. Like, they handle that better than we do. They don't worry about social media. They grew up with it. It's just the fish in water. They don't even think about it. I think social media and politics, because it's dominated by older people, is skewing the greatness that is coming in this next generation. I know we already talked at length about the structural problems of both of our countries. That's a real thing. You got to deal with pensions and entitlement reforms and health cares and tax. I get all that, demographics. I know there's structural problems, but me dealing with young people, I'm more encouraged now than I've been in my whole life, because I think the next generation gets it better than we do. I think they know how to use the technology tools better than we do. I think they have zero tolerance for prejudice. Zero. Like, my kids and their friends, they have no time for prejudices, racial, sexual, religious, they don't tolerate that. They're just like, no, you're dumb. I'm not wasting my time on you. They're that blunt about it. I'm encouraged about what the next generation is going. When you look forward to America and you're viewing it from your point of view, are you optimistic of this next generation coming up? I know there's problems, but I feel pretty encouraged, actually.
I haven't had as much experience with the next generation, certainly next generation Americans, as you would have done, so it's hard to say. But the fact that they've grown up in the American environment, and they're going to have this shared culture, this shared identity. Yeah, I don't see why. I mean, people have often predicted the end of America or the decline of America. People often say, oh, 20th century was the American century, 21st century is the Chinese century. I don't buy that at all. I think for all the issues we have now, I don't see why America can't continually reinvent itself. And I have no worries really about America, in the long term. You're a vibrant country. You've got that draw that China especially doesn't. I don't see any reason why you should have anything to be concerned about long term.
We beat up on the UK quite a bit today just because of the hot mess that's going on with the politics, but there's also some good stuff going on. Give us a couple positive things in the UK for us over here, because we've been throwing some rocks. You can throw a couple back now if you want to, because we got our own hot mess election coming up and all that. But give folks a couple of the positive things going on in the UK now, because it's not all doom and gloom. There is some good stuff going on.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting country. We've got so much history. Obviously, Parliament at the centre, which I would always advocate for. But you go around the UK, people come here and they love it. Americans love coming here, and there's a reason for that. But also as well, culturally, we punch above our weight culturally. I mean, one thing I've noticed in the last 20 years since I started my infatuation with America is that actually British culture is permeating America more than it used to, and that's probably because of social media. But
actually, down Nabby.
Yeah, I mean, everything: films, TV, songs, video games. It's heartening to see. Like I've been on social media and I've seen like Americans who are into their football and baseball, American football, I should say, and they're using like memes, British football memes. And I love seeing that. I love seeing like this random American that I follow doing Harry Kane memes, and getting involved with that sort of stuff. And it's great to see that this shared language is bringing us together. And actually, American culture's come over here, but likewise, British culture's come over there as well. And it's nice to see that we can still punch above our weight in that regard.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I know in the piece that we were talking about that's linked in the comments, you had the Yeltsin picture, but so much of the fall of the Soviet Union happened culturally. When they got TV and they could see it and the music came in, and there was a big cultural component to that time period and the change and the wall coming down. Culture had a lot to do with that. American soft power has always had an American cultural element. And English culture is, it's 1 and 1A. There's a lot of parallels there. But culture is important. And that's one of the things I've been trying to figure out a way to write about this, and I can't get my head around it. But, we went from the Pax Americana to the Repax Americana, which is, instead of Pax Peace, Repax, which is predatory. The corruption and the predatory nature, and we're not going to help your country unless we get something out of it. That's where I think's a real danger to the politics of the moment in America.
I think it's temporary.
I think it's temporary too, but it's damaging because you lose that cultural thing is something you don't want to throw away willy-nilly, because that's hard won. That's really hard won. That can't, the post-World War II good sentiments, the fact that we kept the peace in Europe by parking ourselves there for years and years and years. The American cultural influence in a positive light for the world is something we're throwing away by accident that we should not be throwing away. It really is that fence you pull up that you need to know why the fence is there before you pull it up. Just throwing away that cultural identity of America is a good thing, is a good force in the world, and throwing it away for corruption and greed I think that could be a generational sin to America if we don't get a handle on it pretty quick.
I agree, but I think most of that will come back. I think, people are quite short-termist now. In a few years' time, I think people mostly look back at it and say, yeah, that was Trump. I mean, there's some damage done, but I think the scars will be there, but I don't think it will be a terminal thing.
I've talked to so many people, especially in Europe, also the Middle East, some of the contacts I have. India is one that's really been interesting because they've really had a rocky road with Trump, where they really thought he was going to be good for them. And then he's, the Indians, especially, they're just like, we're just going to wait it out. And I've heard it from, I've heard it from other people in Parliament, and I've heard it from you. We've had that conversation offline. Like, everybody's just going to kind of ride it out. We'll get what we get, and then we'll readjust and see who the next guy is. So it does get overblown in American media of like, we've lost our state. No, people know people understand our political system.
And Trump's
But it
very
is damaging.
Trump is at Bush 2 levels, like second term Bush levels. He's very unpopular, and this is what I brought up in the piece that the similarities between the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Trump's very unpopular. People can see that. We know that he's not liked in America. Americans don't like him generally.
But I think it is going to be one of those things where, look, I got a lot of scars, man. I've had a lot of surgeries, I got a lot of scars. The skin ain't ever just right after that. Like, even though it heals, I think we're giving away more than we're going to look back and go like, okay, we should regret that because we lost some stuff that's going to be really, really hard to get back for the next generation. And that part worries me more than the politics or the ins or the outs or we can change economic policy. We can redo economic treaties. We can readjust defense postures and all that. The trust part's real. And it's something that's getting damaged. It's not just because of Trump, although Trump's doing it. You can't be unreliable. Yeah. And if we keep doing this where we elect unserious leaders, the world is rightly going to see us as an unserious people, even though we're very powerful as a country. They're going to rightfully see us as an unserious people if we don't elect serious leaders. And there's going to be validity to the accusation. And that's whether it's we can have incompetent Democrats as well as we can have incompetent Republicans, and we can have corrupt. We've had corruption both parties. I think we need to elect serious people, or we just have to wear the hat of we are an unserious people. And I think right now we're a very unserious people because we have the prosperity to get away with it. And that's I love my country. That's where we're at. You got to look at it and be honest too.
Look, we're not electing serious people either. So we're in the same boat as you to an extent. We're not electing anyone serious.
You're going on number 7 of how do you view Cameron?
I like Cameron. I think he made some mistakes, but I think he was a serious politician.
He's going to get saddled with Brexit.
But I think that was something that needs to be dealt with. I think he should get credit for actually at least trying to deal with it because people just ignored it.
But that was the start of this. With 6, you get egg roll, as I called it in my piece, except you're not getting an egg roll. And then the 7th, and we already know who the 8th is going to be probably. So this sequence of events kind of started there with the UK. I don't think Burnt, and my piece is up. You can read it as a Substack and or Ordinary Times, both. Hertel Substack. I can't plug my own stuff today because I'm not feeling well. But you can just see it coming, man. Burnham's going to have some kind of a crash out event in the first 3 to 6 months. And by this winter, when the fuel prices go up again, he's going to be toast. And then it's just a matter of how much of a chunk Reform and Restore and the Tories take out of each other to see how that election shakes out in 2020. Because you got to have one in 2027, right?
2029. 2029 it'll be that's when it should. That's the latest it can be, but it could be earlier.
So sometime in the next 18 months, somebody's going to call a general election, give or take.
No, sometime in the next 3 years.
Yeah, it's not going to go 3 years with this kind. They're going to have to do something. So
we'll wait and see.
Yeah, somewhere in here, y'all going to have an election, and I think whoever gets in next is going to have the exact same problem, and then it's going to probably settle down.
Yeah.
And that's a rough place to be because you're sitting there going like, okay, we're just going to have old military term. You're going to have to embrace the suck for a while. And I kind of see that in American politics right now too, because you're going to have the Trump backlash election coming, rightfully so. You always do. Mm-hmm. But I think that's not going to be the thing either. I think it's the election after that's going to be more telling. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you're going to have the reaction election, and then everybody's going to get past it, and then you're going to kind of decide where we're going to go after that. And then we're going to deal with Social Security being insolvent and the hard tax raises and all that coming that nobody wants to talk about. Or as my dad jokes, he goes, yeah, we got 10 more years, but I'll be dead by then, so we're good to go. I'm like, well, that's not a help because he's 80. Like that doesn't help me on multiple fronts, Dad. Don't say that. I just, maybe that's a good place to leave it. America's great. England's a wonderful place, but we're all going to have to embrace the suck.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm glad I'm not in frontline politics anymore. I'm glad I just work, a bit further back from it.
I mean, you're an Aston Villa fan. You should be used to this.
Well, we're doing well now, so this is the best we've been in 30, 40 years. So
you're always good during the off season. Stop it.
Yeah, well, it was good at the end of the season. I mean, the end of the last season was the best season we've had in 40 years, 45 years. So, I mean, when it comes to Villa, I'm embracing the joy.
We cannot let England win the World Cup in America on the 250th. That's just not right.
Oh, it would be nice. It would be nice.
the FIFA dropped the ball so bad. How do you not have America playing in Philadelphia today?
Well, don't get me started on FIFA. No one likes FIFA.
Well, I know they're the most incorrigibly corrupt people on the planet, but like, just of all the no-brainer things to do, how do you not jimmy it so that America is playing England in Philadelphia on the 4th of July? Can you imagine? Like, that would get 1 billion people watching it easily.
Yeah.
I'm not even joking. Like, the entire planet would watch that.
And
that would probably be the highest rated game in the history of ever.
Canada. You've got Canada playing on the 4th of July in an hour instead. That doesn't make you feel.
Well, you know, I do Canadian TV. I've got to work in it. So I do a lot of Canadian TV, and it's really funny because it's been fun in our meetings because I get to give them heck about hockey because we built them in the World Hockey thing, and then we got the Stanley Cup, and they haven't had it since I was like 11 or whatever. And so we're better at hockey. You know, our red southern states are better at hockey than Canada. It's kind of the running joke right now.
Yeah,
because Vegas and Raleigh won it this year in Carolina. So we joke with them about hockey and stuff. But my line with our Canadian friends, when I really want to tick people off in a meeting, I was like, well, that's why 93% of you live within an hour of the border, so you can be close to a real country. You know, I love you, Canada. I'm joking, but so stuff like that. So yeah, Canada's fun. Our buddy Ben Harris, this has been fun, man. I appreciate you doing this. We did this a couple of years ago. We hadn't done it, and then when my travel plans got screwed up, I was like, let's run it back and have a Englishman for the 4th of July. Tell people where they can follow you. You got the Substack up now. I know you're back working in Parliament, so you're not doing a whole lot of media. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to us. But let folks know where they can find you and keep up with you until we see you again.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you, Andrew. And yeah, I hope you have as good 4th of July as you can.
Yeah, and I think you'd make a good West Virginian, man. If you ever actually want to immigrate, we'll get you a nice West Virginia girl to marry. We'll get it all worked out.
I want to visit West Virginia. I've heard it's very beautiful.
Yeah, you know, my dad's people all came from Ireland. I always wondered why they settled in West Virginia, and then the first time I went to Ireland, I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it." They come out of New York and they're like, just see nothing but green. They're like, "Oh, we died and went home." Okay, now it makes sense. So, you know. Good stuff, Ben Harris. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, sir.